Welcome. I'm Todd O'Hare, President and CEO of the Montana Chamber of Commerce.
Charles Robinson, I'm the Government Relations Director.
And just wanted to welcome everybody for our Tuesday Capital Connection. We're recording this. And so once we get done with our brief of kind of what some of the high points were from last week and then kind of what we're working on this week, we'll shut the recording off and then open it up for any sort of questions and answers, so that if you've got questions, you can feel free to ask that in a atmosphere that you don't have to worry about it being recorded. I'll point out too, real briefly, that if you have interest in keeping up with the bills that we're tracking on a day-to-day basis, go to the montanachamber.com website. We have a bill tracker under the 68th legislative session underneath that little tab up there in the upper right-hand corner. You can click on that, and we're keeping that up to date so that you can kind of have an idea of the bills that we oppose, the bills that we're supporting, and some of the bills that we're just kind of keeping an eye on, at least for now. And so that's a good way to kind of keep track of what we've got going on in this legislative session. So real briefly, last week was a big week for us. As you all know, tort reform is our priority going into this legislative session. Governor Gianforte is taking the lead on tax reform and on regulatory reform. And so we're taking the lead on tort reform. And it's not exactly the most exciting set of bills that a fellow could introduce. They're kind of in the weeds and complicated and require a lot of legal kind of expertise to interpret them. But the important part is that they all lend to creating a business climate in Montana. And one of the things that we're very focused on is what can we do to make the legal and the litigation climate in Montana more favorable for business, because it adds to that overall business climate that we have in Montana. And so last week we had hearings on 3 of our bills that were related to tort reform. And I think those hearings went well. Charles, would you agree with that? I mean, I don't think we ran into too many sort of challenges there.
Yeah, no, we had good hearings. There was a little bit of opposition, which you expect with any bill that's worthwhile. And but generally, talking with members of the committee afterwards, I think they appreciated what we were doing. And looks like we are going to be working on a few amendments with a couple of those bills. Just a few good points came up in the hearing. Some comments came in later, mostly from friends and allies, and making some suggestions. So we're working on a little bit of new language in a few places, and that should get introduced and addressed on the bills later this week.
So we had great support. Charles and Sheridan spent a tremendous amount of work getting in our allies and getting them lined up to testify. And I think those hearings went really well. We also had a hearing on our ballot initiative bill. And I think it's important to bring this one up. It doesn't really fit in the tort reform arena, but the initiative process that we're fixing through this legislation is to try to bring a little bit more transparency to that, so that you can kind of sort out which ones are serious attempts and which ones aren't so serious. And also to put a little bit more onus on those that are bringing those ballot initiatives for us. Like, you got to have more than just a half-baked idea. You need to have, a sensible sort of strategy for bringing this forward before you run the state of Montana and the various governing agencies through the gauntlet and spend a whole bunch of time and energy on quite frankly, what would be some crazy initiatives if they make it to the ballot. Yeah. So that was last week. I'll also touch base on just a couple of others real quick. High level, we continue to see a few minimum wage law bills that are introduced, and we pose those. We think that the market is settling that out, figuring that out. Not everybody can do more than what the minimum wage is, and those that have the capacity are, as we deal with the workforce shortage. And so those were a couple of the big highlights, and that sucked a lot of the oxygen out of our room last year as we were focusing on those 4 bills, 3 of which fit squarely in the improving the general business climate in Montana as is related to litigation.
Yeah.
What are you looking at this week?
Well, the ground is shifting rapidly, things moving around and changing, but we're expecting this afternoon to weigh in on House Bill 382, and that is to relate to career and technical education and student organizations, provide support for those state organizations that support the career clubs in the high schools.
This is like DECA.
Yeah.
Skills USA.
You might have heard of the FFA,
Yeah,
those
right.
kind of things. So we're going to be definitely throwing our support there. It's a big part of the chamber's effort for workforce development, and these are kind of skill opportunities that in some ways the students are teaching themselves. So that's a big way we can leverage state resources. And then we're also Senator Jason Small of Busby has a bill to prohibit local governments from banning gas and diesel.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, in some ways we sit and ask ourselves, is this really a risk? Who's proposing to ban this? But you know, if you sit back and wait until those bans actually take shape, you could find yourself in a fairly weak position to oppose it. So and you're seeing some of these kind of proposals, especially limits on even putting natural gas in your home in other parts of the country. So we're going to be there with Senator Small to support his bill. That's Senate Bill 228.
It's a ban on the ban.
Yeah,
That's really what it
ban
is.
the
It's
ban,
kind of
yeah.
what we're calling it here. It's a ban the ban, right?
Yeah.
So
And then we've got a couple of bills in a couple more legal reform bills later in the week. Thursday, we're going to see Senate Bill 260, which is to revise Montana's insurance laws and exempt captive insurers and self-insured companies. And that the purpose of that law is to regulate the relationship between an insurance company and its customer. And in the case of a captive insurance or self-insured situation, the insurance company is owned by the customer. So this just creates extra opportunities for legal maneuvering and extra level of regulation that we think is unnecessary. Montana can be fairly competitive at attracting these companies to domicile here. So we are working with some other allies to revise the Insurance Act there. And also, I think there's an opportunity for a fairly large move, significant progress with Senate Bill 279. This is Senator Fitzpatrick's bill to revise the offer of settlement law. And right now we have a situation where if you're in a real property lawsuit or a contract lawsuit and the damages claimed are less than $50,000, if one party makes a settlement offer to the other, and then the settlement offer is rejected, and later at trial the judgment comes in below the settlement offer, more favorable to the person who offered it, then that party that offered the offer, if I can say that 5 times fast, that party is going to be able to recover its attorney's fees from the other side. So we want to take that threshold from $50,000 up to $3 million to say even in larger disputes, this really encourages fair and reasonable settlement early in a case. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do here is ensure that people are fairly compensated, that it happens early in a case and happens with as little legal wrangling as necessary so that we keep those costs low. Yeah, and then I don't know, are we
nothing else going on?
Yeah, nothing else. Pretty lazy week other than
That's
that.
right, yeah. We're also keeping an eye on, there's a number of bills that are coming after some of the resort taxes and some of the bed taxes. And so we're engaging in those as those come along and are appropriate. We're starting to wade more into the tourism and outdoor recreation and film arena. So we're keeping our eye on that sort of thing, and we're engaging in those as appropriate. But you can imagine, you know, when we've got, you know, high tourism sort of activity that we've seen in Montana over the last couple of years, there's a lot of interest in like, how can we divert those dollars to other interests? And largely, conceptually, I would say that, you know, our position has been, you know, things are good, but right, we want to make sure that we're always in a position that we can promote Montana for the tourism and outdoor recreation field. And so we're largely supportive of like maintaining a bit of a status quo when it comes to those sort of funding mechanisms for promoting tourism and outdoor recreation. And so unless there's anything else you've got to throw in there, Charles,
I think that's
for
it.
this week, I think that's going to wrap us up. And so
You know, on the ballot initiatives, something interesting happened. If you're following these bills, you might notice that Senate Bill 153 which is a bill to undo a lot of ballot initiative progress from the last session. It was voted out of committee, and I think the members of the committee felt they owed it to another senator just to at least give him a chance to have his bill on the floor. And so they gave Senator Molnar a chance to take his bill to the floor, and we'll be opposing that bill on the floor. But we do understand that, you know, I think there's an effort at folks just giving each other a little extra, being conciliatory or friendly to each other a little, and it's good to see, so long as the right outcome at the end. So we'll be watching that debate closely on Senate Bill 153 because it's in direct conflict with our Senate Bill 93, and we hope the one passes and the other doesn't. But that's a little what's going on inside the Capitol.
Great.